Hey guys, tonight we wander into the cold corridors of medieval wealth, where tapestries hang limp against damp stone, and the only thing louder than your servant's sigh is the creak of ancient wood beneath velvet slippered feet. You're a noble now, congratulations. You've inherited land, titles, and a draft so aggressive it deserves a surname. The first thing you notice? It's freezing. Not charming, snowflake on eyelash freezing. More like my bones are trying to leave my body freezing. Your grand estate, with its tall ceilings and ornate window slits, was designed for defense, not comfort. The hearth in the great hall blazes proudly, and heats exactly 2 square feet in front of it. Your breath fogs in the corridor, and your chamber pot has frozen solid. You consider hugging it anyway for warmth. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're tuning in from, and what time it is. Always curious who else is trying to fall asleep in the weirdest ways. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle past a tapestry depicting your great-uncle's crusade, the thread barely clinging to the damp stone behind it. It's decorative, yes, but it also moonlights as insulation, sort of. If you press your hand to the wall, it's clammy. If you press your nose to the air, you catch mildew, mutton, and something your hounds may have contributed hours ago. Your sleeping chamber is better, if you're using better loosely. The 4-poster bed is surrounded by heavy curtains meant to keep heat in. Unfortunately, it mostly keeps in the smell of wet wool and your own breath. You lie down and immediately realize that your feather mattress is more feather idea than execution. Lumpy, uneven, with one suspiciously crunchy corner, possibly ancient biscuit, possibly rat. You don't want to know. Outside, the wind moans through arrow slits. These are technically windows, but don't expect glass. That's for churches and Venetian merchants. Instead, a thick wooden shutter creaks and complains whenever you try to open or close it. A servant did once attempt to seal it with beeswax and animal fat. That went poorly. Now it just smells like expired candle and mutton stew. Historians still argue whether the high ceilings and wide halls were meant more for showing off or just a side effect of poor architectural insulation. But one thing's clear, nobody's cozy. Even the king, yes, the king, wore multiple fur-lined robes indoors and still caught chills. The Palace of Westminster flooded so often it developed a sort of permanent marsh aroma. So don't feel too bad. You try to warm your hands by the fire basin in the corner. It belches a bit of heat, along with a sharp black smoke that makes your throat feel like you've swallowed an old chimney. It's charcoal, not wood, and expensive enough that you only get it when someone's visiting. Guess you're important today. Enjoy the cough. And don't forget the floors. Stone. Always stone. Rugs were for walking, not insulation, and often crawling with lice. No central heating. No radiant flooring. Just raw, aching cold through your slippers. One poor earl in Yorkshire reportedly wore 4 layers of hose and still had to take turns warming his feet between his hound's ribs. True luxury. You finally settle into bed, tucked beneath 3 blankets, wool, heavier wool, and one that might be horsehair. You're not entirely sure. It bites. Outside, a guard calls out the hour, badly. He might be drunk. Inside, your candle guttering in a metal sconce casts dancing shadows across the stone ceiling, like flickering ghosts of warmer times. And yet, you're rich. Congratulations. You own half the valley, a title no one can pronounce, and a family crest featuring a goose wearing a helmet. But tonight, your toes are numb, your nose is colder than your sword hilt in February, and the mice have started nibbling your bread again. Still worth it? You wake to the delightful sensation of something crawling. Not metaphorically, literally crawling. Under your collar. Congratulations, it's probably lice. Or fleas. Or, if you're especially lucky, both. You scratch lazily, half asleep, and feel the satisfying but horrifying squish of something small meeting its end. The nobility, after all, doesn't just wear luxury, they host it. The fur cloak beside your bed is worth a small village. It's stitched from ermine, lined with sable, and trimmed with the kind of fox that makes poets weep. But when you drape it around your shoulders, you realize it's also home to an entire ecosystem. The collar itches like judgment. Somewhere in that pelt, generations of fleas are living out dynastic dramas more gripping than yours. The servants lay out your garments, each more elaborate than the last. Your chemise is linen so stiff it might stand on its own. Your doublet is padded to show off a military chest you don't possess. And your hose, your hose, is held up by points so complex that dressing takes an hour and at least one person's emotional breakdown. By the end, you're swaddled in layers like an angry onion. You sit at your dressing table, and a mirror of polished brass reflects your weary, blotchy face. A servant offers you a dab of pomander paste, civet and spices smashed together to keep the bad air away. It smells like fermented herbs and dead opulence. You smear some under your nostrils and immediately regret it. It burns. A nobleman's cologne is, as always, a blend of panic and denial. Historians still argue whether medieval elites actually believed strong smells warded off illness, or whether it was just an excuse not to notice their own stink. But every noble had their own signature blend. One countess insisted on rosemary and camphor, another favored rose petals mashed into goat tallow. The results? Let's say memorable. Not pleasant, just memorable. You go to breakfast, scratching discreetly. The bread is stale but solid, and the cheese sweats more than your stable boy. The silver goblet holds weak ale, safer than water, which could kill you faster than battle. Your sleeves drag through the butter. Everything smells vaguely of old feathers and chimney dust. A servant brings in the news. Your cousin has caught the sweating sickness. Again. But back to your outfit. Your tunic's dyed deep blue, a shade so rare it whispers wealth to anyone within 50 feet. The dye comes from woad, fermented in urine and stomped by peasants who should absolutely be paid more. The final result? You look regal. You smell like warm socks left on a riverbank. Outside, peasants tilt their heads to admire your plumage. Or perhaps they're staring because your hat features a pheasant wing larger than your hand. Either way, you nod graciously, as nobles do, and discreetly swat at your neck. Even indoors, the fur doesn't save you. It itches. It crawls. It traps heat until you sweat through your layers, then chills you the second you stop moving. But it's fashionable. And fashion, as we all know, is pain. You once heard a story of a duchess whose corset was laced so tightly she passed out into her soup. She was applauded for her dedication. To be rich in the Middle Ages was to wear your fortune. Every inch of embroidery, every fur lining, every pearl-stitched sleeve was a status flag, and a breeding ground for all manner of discomfort. The finest velvets came from Italy, the silks from Byzantium. By the time they reached your shoulders, they'd passed through more hands than a tax collector on market day. One fringe theory, mostly entertained by very tired costume historians, suggests that nobles intentionally wore itchy, awkward clothing to distance themselves from peasants. If I'm suffering, I must be better than you. Absurd, of course. But when you're on your fifth sneeze of the hour from dust inside your cloak, it feels oddly believable. As you make your way to the hall, one sleeve snags on a candle sconce. You tug. The sconce wobbles. A servant gasps. But no one says a word, because your status is unquestionable, even if your balance isn't. You are glorious. You are wealthy. You are also a walking fabric fire hazard. The lice, meanwhile, are having the time of their lives. You shuffle into the great hall for your feast, and the first thing to assault your senses, aside from the immediate thrum of lute music and someone laughing too loud, is the smell. Rich, greasy, sour, spicy, and very faintly, is that wet dog? That'll be the trenchers. You remember, too late, that dinner isn't just served, it's survived. Your high-back chair creaks beneath you like it's whispering an old warning. Before you, the table groans under platters of steaming meat, peacock, maybe, or swan, possibly boar. It's hard to tell under the crusted sauces and decorative feathers that someone's stuck in upside down. Everything glistens, more from fat than glory, and even the bread looks exhausted. You pick up a knife. It's yours, custom-made, and laid with your family crest and possibly a bloodstain from last week. Forks? Don't be ridiculous. You eat with your hands or a communal spoon. If you drop something, no one blinks. The dogs beneath the table will clean it up faster than your servants. Sometimes faster than you'd like. The wine's been watered, but it still carries that vague tang of the barrel it was born in. A floating speck circles your goblet like it's trying to climb out. You sip anyway. It's better than the water, which is, well, medieval. Even nobles know to avoid it. A duke once tried to install a fountain in his castle and accidentally infected half his household with whatever was living upstream. Historians still debate whether the grandeur of these meals outweighed their risk. Some scholars say nobles hosted lavish feasts to flaunt power, others argue it was the only way to get enough calories to stay alive in such cold, drafty manners. Either way, you're here, and so is the soup. It's gray. It's got things floating in it. And it's hot enough to remove your fingerprints. Across the table, someone belches. Loudly. A servant rushes over to refill their cup, nearly tripping on the rushes that cover the floor. These rushes, straw mixed with herbs, are meant to absorb spills and smells. They do neither. Instead, they trap every crumb and scrap, creating a crunchy, living carpet of decay. Somewhere beneath your boots, you suspect mushrooms are blooming. You tear into your meat with more confidence than precision. The outer edge is crisp and seasoned, the inside is suspiciously raw. You wonder how long it sat near the hearth. Not in the hearth, mind you, just near it, like it had the option to cook but declined. You chew slowly, trying to ignore the squish. The sauce helps. Barely. Next comes the subtlety, which is not subtle at all. It's a dessert shaped like a castle, made of sugar and dyed with something that might once have been betel. You're impressed. You're also slightly concerned, because a servant whispers that last week's subtlety featured a live bird that escaped mid-course and attacked the minstrel. Speaking of minstrels, they're playing now, something lively, something nasal, something performed with more gusto than tuning. The lyrics are scandalous if you listen closely. Which you don't, because you're too busy watching your cousin try to swallow a date stuffed with almond paste and regret. He makes a face like he's seen the Holy Ghost. French food historians believe these banquets often caused indigestion so severe that nobles would retire early, moaning like ghosts into their canopied beds. You're starting to see why. Your stomach feels like it's plotting something. You take another bite anyway. The boar's eye stares back. You stare harder. Eventually, the hall dims as torches burn lower. The air thickens with heat, oil, and the scent of too many rich people trying to pretend they're not uncomfortable. A servant brings round hot towels that are more damp than hot. You wipe your fingers and wonder if that bird feather stuck to your sleeve is decoration or dinner's revenge. Your final course is nuts and candied fruits. You nibble a fig, wondering if it's the kind that housed a wasp. You decide not to ask. Better not to know. Better to chew and smile, noble and dignified, even as your jaw sticks together from honey and your teeth protest in medieval agony. The feast ends not with applause but a sigh. The room exhales. The dogs fight over bones. The servants clear plates with practiced haste, scraping leftovers into pails for pig slop or poorer relations. You rise slowly, gut full, mouth sticky, dignity, well, dented. You feasted like a lord. And you may pay for it later. Possibly with cramps. Possibly with a 4-day fever. Either way, this was luxury. Sort of. You stagger away from the feast, belly stretched like a wineskin left in the sun, and head toward your bedchamber. The hallways flicker dimly, torchlight throwing crooked shadows that make every carved angel on the wall look mildly furious. Maybe they just ate dinner too. You reach your door and push it open, only to be greeted by the damp musk of aged linen and something else. Straw? Yes, but not the clean kind. Your bed, that grand four-poster monstrosity draped in heavy curtains, is stuffed with a time-traveling bouquet of every allergic trigger known to mankind. Hay, feathers, dust, and, if you believe the rumors, dried herbs meant to ward off illness. You're not sure about illness, but they certainly ward off sleep. You crawl under the covers. The topmost quilt is stiff from decades of poorly understood laundering. It smells faintly of lavender and strongly of effort. Beneath you, the mattress creaks like a tired mule, and something beneath the surface shifts. Mice? Possibly. You could report it. You won't. It's too late and frankly, they were here first. Let's not forget the canopy overhead. Once a symbol of opulence, now a fabric trap for centuries of soot, cobwebs, and the occasional adventurous bat. You lie back and try not to look up too long, in case something looks back. Historians still argue whether medieval beds were truly more comfortable than peasant straw piles or simply better decorated suffering. What is known? Your status is measured by your bed size and your willingness to share it. That's right, privacy is a myth. You might be joined by a cousin, a visiting knight, or a scribe with cold feet and no shame. Tonight, you're alone. Sort of. The mice are active. And the bed creaks rhythmically, though you haven't moved. You tuck the furs tighter around your legs and hope that whatever's nesting inside them prefers old crumbs to noble toes. You pull the bed curtains shut and instantly regret it. The air thickens. It traps the scent of your supper, your skin, and something that may or may not be a dead moth. You crack them open again and accept the breeze, sharp, damp, smelling faintly of wood smoke and regret. The chamber pot is nearby, thank heavens. Though you will need to summon the courage to use it, knowing that tomorrow some unfortunate soul will carry it out and pretend not to judge you by its contents. You whisper an apology in advance. Above the mantel, a portrait of your ancestor stares down with oil-painted disapproval. His eyes follow you. His tunic is better embroidered than yours. You hate him a little. You shift in the bed. The feather ticking sighs. Your feet encounter something cold and damp. A misplaced cloth? Or the ghost of a poorly digested pear? You kick it aside and roll over, pulling the quilts up to your ears, nose now pressed against fabric that smells like 10 generations of ambition and mildew. You try to sleep. You try very hard. But the hallways still echo. Somewhere, someone is snoring. Somewhere else, someone is weeping, quietly, poetically, probably after too much mead. A hound howls in the courtyard, and a wind rattles the shutters so hard you expect them to give in, fling themselves open, and announce your midnight doom. You close your eyes. Count backward from 10. Count the fleas you imagine jumping in time with your pulse. Try not to think about the scurrying above, rats in the rafters, or a very small army. Either way, best to let them win. And still, you're better off than most. You have a roof, a bed, an embroidered blanket that itches less than it stabs. You are warmish, dryish, and so full of rich food you may not need to eat for 3 days. You've made it. You're noble. You're rich. And your bed, this rectangle of ancient discomfort, is your nightly throne. Now if only it didn't squeak like it knew your secrets. Sometime after the 15th mouse skitters beneath your bed and the wind shrieks like a banshee wronged, nature calls. And by calls, we mean screams. You throw back the stiff quilts and fumble for the chamber pot, that glorified bowl of dread tucked discreetly near the bedpost. It's metal. It's cold. It's definitely seen things. You consider holding it until dawn, but your gut makes it clear, this is not a night for bravery. The chamber pot wobbles dangerously as you reposition it. You do your business, eyes averted, praying the smell doesn't wake the saints in the tapestry. Afterwards, you cover it with a frayed scrap of linen, as if modesty applies to waste. Somewhere in the castle, a gong sounds, likely a night guard banging metal to keep ghosts away. It does the opposite for you. You try to settle again, but comfort is a lie. So you rise, light a taper, and begin the long, cold shuffle to the privy. Ah, the medieval toilet. A place of humility. A place of wind. The stone hallway echoes your every step as you pass guards half asleep against spears. One blinks at you with the expression of a man who's seen too much and digested too little. You nod solemnly, sharing the quiet dignity of two people who both know where you're going. You reach the garderobe, a narrow, vertical shaft cut into the outer wall of the manor, seated proudly above open air, or worse, a cesspit. You lift your robe and lower yourself onto the icy stone. The wind blasts your thighs with the enthusiasm of accursed bellows. It is not a moment of grace. It is not luxury. It is cold and dark and profoundly humbling. Some castles had more advanced designs, a double-seater, for example. Yes, nobles could relieve themselves in pairs. Friendship, forged in frost and fumes. Historians still argue whether these were functional or just architectural jokes passed off as plumbing. One tale insists a baron once hosted a council session there, 2 dukes, 1 bucket, and a policy decision on turnip taxes. Unconfirmed, but haunting. You wipe with moss, or wool, or a crumbling linen scrap with last year's embroidery still clinging to it. Toilet paper, as we know it, remains a fantasy. And don't ask about hand washing. There's a bowl somewhere with water in it. There may or may not be soap. You do your best and try not to touch anything on the way back. The smell lingers. It clings. The chamber around you has an aroma so persistent it deserves a title. Something like Duke of Damprot. You light incense upon returning, a blend of frankincense and desperation. It almost helps. Almost. You pause before climbing back into bed. Is that a breeze under the door? Of course. The door doesn't fit the frame, because nothing in the manor fits anything. Medieval architecture was more vibes than measurements. You stuff a tapestry scrap under the crack and pray it keeps out the night air and any overly curious cats. The concept of plumbing as you know it simply doesn't exist. Human waste flows into pits, moats, rivers, and, occasionally, back into someone's wine cellar. One noble's castle was so poorly designed that the waste shaft vented directly into the kitchen chimney. The cook resigned with a heartfelt curse and a dead rabbit. And yet, this is what opulence looks like. Every icy moment on the stone bench, every draft on your bare skin, is a reminder that wealth bought status, not comfort. The peasants squatting over fields might be miserable, but at least their waste didn't splash back during a storm. Back in bed, you try to breathe through your mouth and think of forests. Forests without chamber pots. Forests without memories of tonight. Tomorrow, someone will empty your pot, probably with tongs. They'll dump it into the midden heap and mutter something about noble digestion. You will never speak of it again. But for now, as the bed creaks once more and the curtain flutters in the breeze, you lie still, blanketed in cloth, discomfort, and the undeniable stench of history. Morning arrives like a punishment. Not with sunlight, your narrow windows barely admit a glow, but with noise. Hooves on cobbles, shouts from the yard, and the clanging of someone dropping a tray of pewter dishes outside your chamber door. You groan, roll over, and immediately regret it as something sharp jabs your hip through the mattress. You're not sure if it was a goose quill or the spirit of sleep itself trying to flee. A servant enters without knocking, as is custom. She bows without smiling and sets down a basin of cold water. It sloshes like mockery. Your morning wash is a choice between freezing your skin or letting last night's sweat marinate another day. You choose the former, because you're noble, and nobility means suffering attractively. The mirror shows what you already feared: puffed eyes, blotchy cheeks, and hair that has staged a rebellion in 3 directions. To fix it, you apply cosmetics. But of course, this is medieval wealth, which means poisoned by beauty. Your cheeks are dabbed with white lead paste. It gives you that desirable pale glow, the kind that whispers, "I'm rich enough to avoid the sun." Your lips are tinted with a concoction that includes cinnabar, basically mercury, and your eyes? A few drops of belladonna to dilate the pupils. You blink back tears and feel the mild hallucinations begin. Historians still debate whether nobles understood the toxicity of their beauty routines. Some argue they knew and simply didn't care. Others suggest they believed that pain equaled purity. Either way, your face is now technically lethal. You're a walking chemistry experiment with great bone structure. For scent, you dab on some musk oil. It smells like ambition mixed with sadness. The bottle was imported at great cost, carried across Europe by donkey in desperation. You only use 2 drops. One for you, one for the insects. You sit for breakfast. Bread again, but softer today. The jam is blackcurrant, preserved with so much honey it could embalm a mouse. A bit of cold meat and a slab of yellow cheese round it out. It's rich fare, but your appetite is mild. Possibly because you can still taste last night's pour behind your molars. A fellow noble joins you, your cousin, always impeccably dressed and mysteriously unbothered by the lice. She compliments your pallor, and you return the favor by praising her waist, which has been corseted so tightly it whistles when she exhales. Conversation is light. Politics, scandal, and who fainted most impressively at last week's vigil. You hear about a countess who wore actual gold leaf on her eyelids until it melted into her lashes. She blinked gold flakes for a month. Another noble tried to stain her teeth black with burnt rosemary stems. For contrast, she now avoids smiling near candles. Fringe medical theories of the time actually encouraged such practices. Some claimed pale skin showed good breeding, while any rosiness hinted at lust or, worse, labor. So the sicker you looked, the higher your status. Beauty by visible suffering. Your clothes today are heavy, embroidered, and mildly dangerous. Your sleeves are so long they drag behind you like a train, perfect for collecting fireplace ash and errant food crumbs. The bodice is stiff enough to double as armor. Beneath it, your chemise sticks to your damp skin. You dream of cotton. You'll never meet it. Servants lace up your outer garments with the efficiency of people who do this 10 times a day and have heard all the groans before. One mutters that the queen favors even wider collars now. Yours is practically peasant size. You pretend not to hear and vow revenge through hairpins. You pass by your personal chapel on the way out, stopping to light a candle that barely flickers in the damp air. The incense curls around you like ghost breath, and you whisper a prayer. Not for your soul, for your skin. May it survive another day of cosmetic warfare. And as you step into the great hall, blinking through belladonna tears, cheeks painted with a fatal glow, breath tinged with clove and vinegar, you radiate power. Also a faint but undeniable scent of wet fur. Today's schedule includes something truly romantic, a marriage negotiation. Not for yourself, of course, you're already spoken for, whether you like it or not, but for your younger sibling. Or cousin. Or perhaps that one nephew who never stops sneezing. In the noble world, love is a battlefield, and the weapons are livestock, land, and linen dowries. You sit stiffly in a side chamber, watching your steward shuffle scrolls and sip ink-stained wine. Across from you, the rival family's representative looks equally bored. He fiddles with his signet ring while making vague promises about acreage and fertility. No one mentions affection. That would be unseemly. The bride and groom? They're not here. Why would they be? This is about property, alliances, and bloodlines, not feelings. In fact, your future niece has never even seen the man she's meant to marry. She'll recognize him on the wedding day by his doublet and the goat he brings as a gift. Historians still argue whether medieval nobles viewed marriage more as a political transaction or a spiritual contract. Either way, love rarely entered the room unless it was the cause of scandal. Affairs were common, quiet, and occasionally poetic. Courtly love was all the rage, yearning glances, sad lute songs, and absolutely no touching. You glance over the agreement. It details livestock, the dimensions of a promised tapestry, and a clause about reasonable behavior during holidays. You scratch your head, wondering what unreasonable behavior they're already anticipating. The steward adds a note about virginity, delicately phrased, legally binding, and awkward for everyone. Meanwhile, your cousin, yes, that cousin, has announced plans to remarry. Her last husband mysteriously drowned during a falconing trip. She says this new one is docile, which in noble terms means won't ask too many questions about the wine. You sigh and think back to your own marriage. Perhaps it was arranged before you could spell your spouse's name. Perhaps you met them once, said 5 words, and then stood at the altar while a priest blessed your union and your matching facial expressions of dread. The wedding feast was long. The wedding night was longer. And now, you share a life, a bed, and an ever-widening silence. Still, marriage has perks. Combined estates, joint serfs, and the occasional shared hobby, like falconry, embroidery, or mutually ignoring each other. Romance flickers occasionally, like a candle in a drafty chapel. You once touched hands while passing the mustard. Sparks almost flew. You hear of nobles who defied expectations. One baroness eloped with her harp teacher. Another faked her death to escape a betrothal, only to be found 2 months later disguised as a novice nun with extremely good posture. Fringe stories, of course. Most married as told and prayed for either affection or an early widowhood. You remember a wedding feast where the bride was 12, and the groom 37. She cried into her custard. He gave her a brooch shaped like a fish. It was, apparently, a symbol of prosperity. Or awkwardness. And the dowries, oh, the dowries. Silks from the east. Barrels of honey. Entire villages promised like party favors. One infamous count once offered his daughter in 3 mills just to secure a treaty. The daughter later became a poet, possibly out of spite. You leave the negotiation chamber with the document half sealed. The steward promises to finalize things after lunch, which in this world means after he's had a nap and found his better quill. You nod, knowing the bride will be informed tomorrow, by pigeon, if not servant, and expected to smile regardless. You pass a tapestry showing the marriage of your ancestors. It features stiff, emotionless figures holding hands like they're checking for a pulse. Around them are embroidered dogs, grapes, and what appears to be a flaming pie. You stare too long at it and wonder if it's a prophecy. Love, for the wealthy, is a privilege reserved for poets and peasants. You, however, have parchment, property, and an agreement signed in wax. Bath day. Or, more accurately, the bath day. Because in your world, bathing is rare, elaborate, and viewed with both suspicion and ceremony. Today is special either because there's a feast coming or someone important is visiting. Otherwise, you'd just be wiping yourself with vinegar-soaked cloths and hoping no one sniffs too closely. The servants begin early, hauling wooden tubs the size of wine barrels into your chamber. They line it with cloth so the splinters won't bite your noble skin. Water must be heated over fires in the kitchen, bucket after steaming bucket, lugged upstairs and sloshed in with grunts and spills. By the time the tub is full, the top layer is already cold. You undress slowly, each garment peeled away like layers of dusty cake. One servant takes your cloak, another handles your underrobe. You climb into the tub carefully, hissing as the warmth meets skin long denied it. And there you sit, knees poking above the surface, water just cloudy enough to remind you this isn't your first soak in it. It's quiet, except for the faint crackle of the hearth and the sound of dripping, always dripping. You close your eyes and lean back, trying to relax. But of course, the bath itself is not exactly private. In comes the herbalist, tossing in a bundle of dried lavender and sage wrapped in cheesecloth. Supposedly this wards off illness. Possibly it just wards off modesty. The room smells better now, like damp hope and expensive herbs. Historians still debate whether the upper class avoided baths out of fear or laziness. One theory says hot water opens the pores, letting in disease. Another suggests bathing too often was considered vain or indulgent. You find that hilarious, considering you've got 3 rings on each hand and a gold-trimmed chamber pot. You hear of queens who bathed monthly, kings who bathed twice a year. One duke bathed only on religious holidays and died very scented according to a dubious monk's journal. But peasants? They bathed in rivers, whenever they could. Which might be more often than you. You reach for the soap, a rare commodity, shaped like a brick and smelling faintly of sheep and ash. You lather it between your hands, which squeak in protest. The sensation is alien. Your skin hasn't known slipperiness in weeks. A servant offers you a cloth and starts scrubbing your back. You tense, remembering that one spot near your shoulder blade that always flares like it's hiding a guilty memory. They scrub with diligence. Maybe too much diligence. You're half laid before they finish. The bathwater has cooled by now. It clings to you like guilt, and you suddenly miss being dry. You rise awkwardly, water sluicing off in muddy rivulets, and wrap yourself in a linen sheet that might once have been white. You stand there dripping while the tub is emptied, thrown out a window, perhaps. Or into the moat, where it will join the other noble excretions. You're dried with wool towels that are less towel and more suggestion. Your hair is powdered with a mix of flour and crushed herbs, because actual washing would be too much. You smell like a spiced loaf left in the sun. Cosmetics come next. More lead paste. More fragrant oils to convince your skin not to protest. And a dab of civet behind the ears, an odor so musky it has its own reputation in poetry. You're clean now, in theory. You feel raw, vulnerable, and only slightly less itchy than when this began. And now, to dress again. Every layer that comes back untraps a bit more moisture, a bit more of that cloying perfume. By the time your doublet is fastened, you feel like a boiled onion wrapped in lace. You walk through the hallways with a slight sway, not from pride, but from the chafing. Servants nod in admiration, or maybe they're just grateful. A clean noble is a rare sight. A dangerous sight. They might be preparing for war. Or marriage. You hear rumors that in far-off lands, people bathe in public. In steaming pools with strangers. Laughing. Smiling. Relaxing. You can't imagine anything more scandalous. Or tempting. Tonight, you'll lie in bed with the faint satisfaction of having removed the outermost crust of your discomfort. But you'll know, deep down, that luxury isn't always about having more. Sometimes it's just about not itching everywhere at once. You're summoned to the stables this morning, not for work, of course, but for a noble's most treasured luxury, the ride. You slip into your outdoor attire, layering fur upon wool upon something vaguely leathery, each piece heavy enough to bruise. By the time you're fully dressed, you feel less like a human and more like a well-upholstered chair. Outside, the air is crisp with the bite of late frost. The cobblestones are slick, the sky a dull gray quilt. A stable hand brings out your horse, a magnificent beast, bred for war, hunting, and occasionally trampling a peasant who looked at you the wrong way. You mount with all the grace of someone balancing 3 cloaks and a ceremonial sword that jingles more than it cuts. The saddle creaks beneath you, and you start your ride through the manor grounds. Birds scatter. Dogs bark. Somewhere, a child is scolded for standing too close to your path. You nod with dignity, as nobles do, while trying not to sneeze. Your cloak's fur trim is molting again, and a tuft just entered your nostril. Historians still argue whether daily rides were about exercise, visibility, or plain old ego. Likely all 3. You're not just riding for fun, you're seen riding. Which is important, since most of your subjects would never approach you directly. Unless they were dying. or asking for grain. Or, often, both. Your gloves chafe, and your boots pinch. You ignore it. A noble must suffer elegantly. That's the rule. As you pass the outer village, peasants bow or curtsy, depending on whether they still have knees that bend. Some don't look up at all. Custom? Fear? Or simply too tired to bother. You return their silence with a generous glance. And then the wind shifts. Your horse snorts, your eyes water, and the full symphony of the manor's sanitation system wafts across the road. The stench of waste pits, open drains, and last night's discarded stew collides with your nostrils like an insult. You consider turning back. But no, you're noble. You ride through it. A fringe theory suggests that nobles had a slightly higher tolerance for terrible smells because they were simply surrounded by them more often, in finer fabrics, but the same odor. Some even carried perfumed pouches on chains, pressed dramatically to their noses. You opt for stoicism, until your horse decides to relieve itself mid-stride, and you're suddenly enveloped in your mount's own expression of luxury. You continue toward the hunting grounds. A small falconer's camp waits near the trees, and you consider calling for a hawk just to shake off the memory of that particular moment. But the sky threatens rain, and you remember the last time you got caught in it. Your silk doublet shrank, and you had to explain your silhouette for a week. On the return ride, your joints ache, not just from the cold, but from the sheer effort of maintaining noble posture. Slouching is for scribes. You sit tall, even as your thighs beg for mercy. The saddle is wood beneath leather, and while technically cushioned, it feels like someone patted it with moral judgments. You pass the kitchen door on your way back into the courtyard. Smoke billows out, mixed with the smell of boiling bones and overcooked onions. A boy stirs a pot big enough to drown in. He sees you and nearly drops the ladle. You nod again, regally, warmly, like a monarch bestowing recognition upon the turnip class. You dismount stiffly, hand your reins to a lad whose eyes widen at your spurs, and try not to wince as your legs remember how to walk. Your cloak drags slightly in the mud. That'll be a stain impossible to explain. Yes, that's pigeon fat and horse sneeze. You'll have to mutter tomorrow, as the launcher sweeps quietly into the cauldron. You return to your chamber smelling of leather, sweat, smoke, and a hint of damp hoof. A servant begins unlacing your riding attire, which clings to you like a second, angrier skin. You peel it away layer by layer, like regrets from a poorly aged night. And yet, you feel satisfied. You rode. You were seen. You endured both nature and nobility's finest discomforts without falling off your horse or insulting a distant cousin's mill. That, in your world, is a triumph. Now, if only you could sit down without grimacing. You've barely had time to recover from the indignities of your morning ride when your steward enters with a small scroll and an expression that suggests someone's about to get fined for wearing the wrong socks. He clears his throat, bows unnecessarily low, and announces the arrival of the sumptuary inspectors. Ah yes, sumptuary laws. A noble's favorite nightmare in embroidered form. You, dear aristocrat, may have inherited lands, titles, and a suspiciously expensive tapestry of a lion jousting a boar, but heaven help you if your belt is stitched with illegal gold thread. These laws, as you know all too well, dictate who can wear what, eat what, and display what, because appearances must reflect the rigid social pyramid, or else the entire kingdom might collapse under the weight of misplaced velvet. Today, your household will be inspected for any signs of fashion ambition above your station. This is not just about showing off. It's about knowing your place. You sit still as the inspectors arrive, grim men with graying eyebrows, carrying parchment scrolls and judgment like perfume. Historians still argue whether these laws were truly enforced or simply symbolic. In theory, a baron couldn't wear ermine. In practice? Well, that depended on bribes, family connections, or whether the inspector wanted an invitation to the next hunt. Your doublet is examined first. It's technically legal, dyed deep burgundy with madder root, not the restricted Tyrian purple. The sleeves, however, are trimmed in something suspiciously furry. One inspector sniffs. Another strokes. A third raises a brow. You explain, calmly, that it's squirrel, not ermine. Domestic squirrel. Nothing exotic. Not a whisper of imported luxury. The inspector nods but marks something anyway. You will receive a fine. Or perhaps just a warning. Or perhaps he'll return next week wearing the same fur and pretend it was his idea. The shoes are next. They are a problem. long, pointy, and curled like the toes of someone trying to flee fashion on horseback. Technically, you're only allowed a toe extension of 6 inches. Yours curled to nearly 8. The inspector measures, sighs, and scribbles on his scroll like he's writing a eulogy for good taste. Sumptuary laws once dictated that only royalty could wear silk embroidered with real gold. You wear silk embroidered with something that only claims to be gold. Probably brass. Or dried mustard. You pray they don't test it. A fringe belief held that strict sumptuary codes prevented social chaos, that if a merchant dressed like a duke, rebellion would soon follow. Others suggest the laws were just a tax with extra steps. Either way, the rich found ways around them. They always do. You think back to a wedding where a minor baron's wife wore sleeves so massive they had their own names. She claimed they were hand warmers. The crown fined her enough to build a chapel. She built a gazebo instead. One of your cousins once dyed her veil in crushed lapis and was nearly excommunicated. Not because it was illegal, though it was, but because the bishop's niece had worn the same shade the week before, and the rivalry ran deeper than theology. The inspectors move on to your wall hangings. Some of them show battle scenes with knights in illegal armor polish. Others depict fruits that only grow in the East, which could suggest trade connections beyond your rank. One tapestry in particular, featuring a unicorn with suspiciously gold teeth, is quietly removed for review. You nod. You don't argue. To argue is to invite further inspection. And besides, you'll bribe the right official tomorrow and have it back by Tuesday. The entourage finally departs, leaving behind the scent of cold wax and controlled resentment. You sit very still, aware that your entire wardrobe must now be reconsidered. No more velvet on Thursdays. No more striped hose with double linings. Absolutely no pearl-edged gloves before Easter. You sigh and make a note to have your tailor flog gently. And yet, wasn't all this supposed to be the reward of wealth? To wear what you want? To shimmer and gleam and sparkle until peasants covered their eyes in awe? But no! Even in riches, you were measured, watched, restricted. The sumptuary laws remind you of your place, even at the top. And though your sleeves may drag the ground and your shoes may jab your horse's ribs, your true wealth lies in navigating the rules, not escaping them. You step into the chapel in your manor's east wing, dressed in your second finest robe, because your finest is still under investigation for excessive sheen. Candles sputter in the damp air, each flame licking the shadows with solemn, flickering judgment. The scent is familiar, beeswax, mildew, and the faint whiff of unspoken guilt. The altar glitters with silver, though some pieces are plated more with hope than actual metal. Your family crest is embroidered into the kneeling pillows, carefully, reverently, and in the wrong colors. You try not to look at them too long. Your grandmother commissioned those pillows after her 4th miscarriage. Now they serve mostly as uncomfortable reminders of divine silence. You kneel. The stone flags are cold beneath your knees, and the cushion does nothing to soften the ache. You murmur the usual prayers, Latin phrases you've memorized more by rhythm than meaning. One for health, one for forgiveness, one for not choking on a date pit during dinner. You never know when that last one might be needed. Religion, for you, is not optional. It's woven into every part of noble life. Every inheritance, every marriage, every land deed comes with a blessing and a threat. God watches. So do priests. And sometimes, so do your enemies, quietly, from the back pew. A monk enters, robes dragging, face like weathered parchment. He bows, offers a quiet blessing, and begins the morning office. You listen, mostly. Occasionally you drift, thinking of your cousin's scandal, or whether the kitchen will oversalt the stew again. Guilt follows, of course, like a well-trained hound. You close your eyes tighter. Historians still argue whether medieval nobles were deeply devout or merely strategic with their faith. Did they believe? Or just need to believe? Either way, you cross yourself dutifully and at the reliquary behind the altar. It supposedly holds a saint's finger. You've always thought it looked suspiciously like a chicken bone, but faith, as they say, is a matter of perspective. You donate, of course, generously, lavishly, enough to repaint the murals and refashion the altar cloths. In return, the priest prays for your soul's salvation and conveniently forgets that awkward situation last spring with the merchant's daughter and the cellar steps. The walls are adorned with painted saints, serene, suffering, and always dressed better than you, somehow. One holds a palm branch, another a sword. The Virgin Mary gazes down with that eternal expression of disappointed compassion, as though she too disapproves of your shoes. You light a candle for your late brother. The wax drips steadily, pooling like regret. You still don't know what truly happened to him. The fever? Or the physician's leeches? Or the argument he had with that night in the orchard the week before? You'll never ask. Nobility doesn't pry. We pay. We pray. The chapel also serves as a confessional space, though rarely for you. Confession requires admitting things you haven't yet worked out how to frame as virtues. Better to remain vague. Forgive me, Father, for I have envied. That can mean anything. And everything. You once heard of a baron who confessed to murder just to preempt a rival's accusation. He did so in Latin, added 2 chickens to the offertory, and was absolved by sundown. Fringe story? Maybe. But in this world, forgiveness has a sliding scale. And gold makes the priesthood move faster. Service ends with a chant. You mumble the final verse, voice hoarse, knees aching, soul still dubious. The monk nods, closes the book, and extinguishes a candle with his sleeve. He smells faintly of turnips and old ink. You stand slowly, joints creaking, and make the sign of the cross once more. Just in case. And as you leave the chapel, stepping back into the chill of your manor's east corridor, you feel holier, but not warmer. The divine may live within these walls, but he clearly does not manage the heating. Still, you're rich. You're pious. You're wrapped in wool, powdered in lead, and spiritually audited at least twice a week. Surely, heaven takes note. You wander the castle halls after morning prayer, cloak swaying, boots thudding softly on stone. The place echoes like it's trying to remember better days. You pass suits of armor that haven't been polished since your grandfather's gouty toe ended a joust early. Tapestries flap gently from wall drafts. Somewhere above, pigeons coo in the beams like they own the place, and honestly, they might. Your castle is beautiful, yes. Also mildly terrifying. The stone walls are thick enough to stop arrows, but not sound. The wind howls through cracks and whispers down staircases. At night, it creaks and groans like an old dog dreaming of younger bones. You once mistook the sounds for ghosts. You weren't entirely wrong. This is not a warm home. It's a fortress with windows too small to let in light, and too high to see out of. Most days feel like dusk, even at noon. You wrap your fur tighter, which does nothing. Cold here is clever. It finds your knees, your knuckles, the small of your back. It settles in like an unwanted relative. Historians still debate whether medieval castles were designed more for defense or discomfort. The answer, most agree, is yes. You feel that deeply today, as your fingers go numb halfway through breakfast and your bathwater steams like a ghost fleeing your chamber. The courtyard below is bustling with guards drilling, stable boys cursing, and a goose that has clearly declared itself in charge. You gaze down from your high window, the view distorted by glass so flawed it turns peasants into polite blobs. You retreat to the solar, the only room with decent light. The windows here are glazed, tiny diamonds of imported luxury that scream "look how rich I am," while simultaneously letting in a draft that screams back "you'll regret this." You try to read, but the chill seeps into your fingertips. You drop the book and sit by the hearth, where a modest fire smolders more in theory than practice. A servant brings wine. It's warm, heated with spices and optimism. You sip and gaze around the room, noting the cracks in the plaster, the water stains in the corner, and the unmistakable silhouette of mildew behind the Madonna fresco. Still, this is your stronghold. Your fortress. Your freezing, echoing, pigeon-infested palace. Fringe architects occasionally argue that castles weren't meant to be lived in comfortably at all. More like deterrents, display pieces, or weapons you could sit inside. And you? You're the jewel of this weapon, perched on a velvet cushion and covered in hand-me-down frostbite. Your bedchamber, upstairs, has 3 fireplaces. You light all of them during winter, which helps, for about 20 feet in each direction. Beyond that, tundra. One corner of the room has grown so cold, you're half convinced it's learned to whisper. You avoid eye contact with it. You remember a visit to a friend's estate, smaller, lower, with wood paneling instead of stone. It was warmer, cozier, less like living inside a very opinionated cave. You complimented it. He said, yes, but one fire arrow and the whole thing's gone. You nodded politely, though you still dream of that warm chair by his window. Even your tapestries can't save you. You have them everywhere, depicting saints, hunts, battles, and something that might be a dragon but looks suspiciously like a tipsy cow. Their decorative insulation, colorful, moth-nibbled, and only slightly warmer than the wall behind them. And then there are the guards. Always present, rarely helpful. They stomp through corridors, mutter about the damp, and lean on halberds like they're waiting for someone else to do the stabbing. You once asked one to fetch a dropped handkerchief. He bowed so deeply you never saw him again. You end your afternoon walk with a return to the great hall. The hearth there is massive, nearly 2 men tall. But the heat refuses to travel. It's too busy escaping through the chimney. You stand near it anyway, feeling the fire tease your shins while your back shivers in protest. And so, as dusk falls and the castle sighs into its nightly complaint, you sit beneath stone arches, wrapped in fur, watching your breath fog the air. You are wealthy. You are defended. You are possibly one strong breeze away from hypothermia. Still, nothing says power like freezing in your own fortress. You wake up with a headache and a vague sense of betrayal by your own stomach. Something feels off, heavier, tighter, and slightly more medieval. You try to rise, but your limbs ache like you've been jousted in your sleep. Your mouth tastes like old pewter, and your skin is hot in patches, cold in others. Congratulations, you're sick. Illness, of course, doesn't discriminate. But in the Middle Ages, the rich had their own special way of suffering, louder, more dramatically, and often with the added danger of treatment. You groan as your steward enters, already whispering the news to his servant. His lordship is unwell. It sounds less like concern and more like the opening line of your obituary. The physician is summoned. Not a man of science, but a man of confidence in many, many pouches. He enters with the smell of herbs, damp wool, and something alarming in a jar. His beard twitches with importance. His diagnosis? Your humors are out of balance. Of course, historians still argue whether medieval medicine did more harm than good. Most agree that good health back then was less about surviving illness and more about surviving the treatment of illness. You're given the usual options: bloodletting, purgatives, a mustard plaster to the chest, and maybe a poultice made of ground snails and goose grease. You pick the least offensive, and still end up sweating through your bedding while the physician cheerfully tells your footman, yes, that color of bile is excellent. A leech is applied to your neck. It wriggles like a smug little aristocrat of its own. The physician nods as though he's solved the secrets of the universe. You feel dizzy. The bleeding begins. You try not to think about it. You try not to see it. You remember stories. One knight who was bled so frequently he fainted during a tournament. Another noblewoman was treated with hot irons for a head cold. One count was wrapped in boiled cabbage leaves and left near the hearth until he smelled of soup and resentment. Fringe cases? Perhaps. But not rare. Your servants whisper outside your door. One suggests calling for a bone reader, another mutters about an herbalist who uses nettles and singing. You decline both. You're noble. You suffer with dignity, or at least with minimal yelping. Your fever rises. The physician recommends mashing dried toads and applying them to your chest. You pretend to fall asleep to avoid answering. He takes it as success. He'll write to your cousin about his breakthrough. You'll write a will if you survive. A bowl of broth arrives, tepid, thin, and definitely flavored with someone's guesswork. You sip, mostly for the illusion of control. The bedclothes weigh down on you like a moral burden. You sweat. You shiver. You hallucinate your great-aunt riding a pig through your chamber. You tell no one. By nightfall, a priest visits. He offers a blessing and a concerned look. You wonder if he's already chosen a psalm for your funeral. He gives your shoulder a gentle squeeze, which startles you more than comforts you. In moments of clarity, you gaze at your ceiling beams, wondering if they'll hold if they need to suspend a coffin. You make mental notes. No birdsong at the funeral. No cousin Gerald in charge of anything. Bury me with fewer rings. Or maybe more. You'll decide later. Eventually, the fever breaks. Not because of anything the physician did, but perhaps despite it. You wake in the gray light of early dawn, sweat-soaked, mouth dry, leech gone, and somehow, miraculously, not dead. The physician beams. He credits the leech. You credit stubbornness and fear of your cousin inheriting your tapestries. You're not well, not really, but you're upright. Your joints ache, your breath whistles, and your physician still wants to rub something on your temples that smells like wet parsley and grief. But for now, you've survived. Again. Still rich. Still miserable. Still being prescribed wine for a cough. You're finally well enough to leave your chamber, sort of. You still cough like a dying goose and feel like your bones were pickled overnight, but the physician says fresh air will restore the balance, so you're led down the hallway, wrapped in 3 cloaks and escorted by a servant carrying a stool, just in case you collapse with dignity. But today, your schedule holds something more uplifting: entertainment. You enter the inner courtyard where the nobles are gathering. There's a buzz in the air, not joy, not exactly, but a sort of practiced anticipation. Because nothing says elite leisure quite like watching something else suffer for your amusement. A platform has been erected. The minstrels are tuning their lutes, one string away from a nervous breakdown. A bear, chained at the neck, snorts in the corner while a handler pats it lovingly, if such a thing is possible when holding a stick. Bear baiting. A classic. You seat yourself on a carved bench. The wood is cold and harder than your opinions, but you settle in. Nearby, a noblewoman unwraps a candied figure. A child points at the bear and asks if it's going to do tricks. The child is corrected. This is not about tricks. This is about blood. Historians still debate whether such cruelty was viewed as entertainment, tradition, or a reminder of power's reach. The truth likely lies in the overlap, because watching pain, in a strange way, reminded the privileged of their distance from it. The bear snarls. Dogs are released. The crowd leans forward. You lean back, uncomfortable, but not enough to leave. The handler whistles. The bear swipes. The dogs scatter. A cheer goes up. You sip your wine and pretend it doesn't taste like violence. Afterward comes the jesters. Their faces painted, their jokes half scandalous, half unintelligible. One dances with a pig's bladder on a stick. You laugh, not because it's funny, but because everyone else is. The joke is on you, really. A juggler drops a knife, nearly takes out a steward, and bows like it was intentional. The nobles clap. You consider if falling off the platform would count as entertainment or tragedy. Probably both. Then come the ballads, sung by a trio of minstrels with tunics tighter than your physician's logic. They sing of betrayal, lost love, a goat named Hilda, and your distant cousin's failed crusade. That last one gets a chuckle. He fell off a rampart and into history. You've heard the songs before. You'll hear them again. They change the names sometimes, but the misery stays the same. There's always a war. Always a widow. Always a rhyming couplet that makes you question literacy rates. You remember once being entertained by a fire eater. He inhaled flame, coughed black smoke, and then fainted spectacularly. You applauded. Later, you heard he was a chimney sweep borrowing time. He died the next week. No one changed the routine. Fringe scholars sometimes argue that noble entertainment was designed less to thrill and more to distract. You see their point. After all, if you're watching a man swallow knives, you're not thinking about your taxes, or your arranged marriage, or your damp, haunted bedroom. As the event winds down, a noble starts a betting game involving dice, insults, and the number of teeth a goose has. You excuse yourself, not from moral superiority, but from a growing sense of nausea, either from the wine, the bear, or the jester who winked at you one too many times. You wander the edge of the courtyard, boots crunching on gravel, head buzzing not with excitement, but a quiet, tired ache. You pass a servant scrubbing blood from the flagstones. No one else seems to notice. Or care. You glance up at the gray sky, wonder if it will rain, and wonder more if anyone would cancel tomorrow's executions for weather. Probably not. They'd just bring cloaks. Back in your chamber, you remove your cloak, sip some spiced wine, and reflect. You are wealthy. You are safe. You are thoroughly entertained. And yet, you can't shake the feeling that the bear had more dignity than most of the audience. The next morning arrives with whispers, not bells. A servant wakes you before sunrise, pale-faced and trembling, and mutters something that makes your blood thump in your ears. There's plague in the village. You sit up slowly. The air feels heavier. Even the shadows in your chamber seem to hesitate. You've heard the stories. Who hasn't? The coughing. The black boils. The bleeding. And then, the silence. It creeps in like a fog, and by the time it lifts, half the people you knew are gone. You dress quickly. No time for powdered wigs or embroidered hose. Just layers. As many as you can find. As if cloth could shield you from death. Your steward confirms the news. 3 deaths already, more coughing, and a midwife who fled into the woods muttering prayers. The manor is to be sealed. No one in. No one out. You nod, lips pressed tight. The weight of privilege doesn't feel like protection today, it feels like a target. Historians still argue whether the plague moved faster through cities or noble estates. Some say the isolation of castles helped, others insist servants carried it in with every breath. Either way, one thing is certain, wealth was no shield against the Black Death. In fact, it often meant a larger household, more bodies, more chances. Your physician arrives, breathless, with a bundle of dried herbs and a posy held under his nose. He recommends burning lavender, avoiding garlic, for some reason, and not touching anything that smells suspicious. You ask what suspicious means. He shrugs. You walk the halls and see it already, servants huddled, eyes darting. One has a cloth tied around their face. Another cries while scrubbing a stair with vinegar. Everyone is trying. No one believes it will help. In the chapel, a priest is already chanting a funeral mass, even though no body has yet been brought up the hill. You kneel, again, and murmur the same prayers you said during your fever. Only now, the fear is bigger than you. It's coming for everyone. Outside, the manor gate is chained shut. A guard has been posted with instructions to turn away all travelers, even ones with royal seals. He clutches his spear like a crucifix and avoids looking at the smoke rising from the village down below. You try to eat. You can't. The bread tastes like dust, the broth like sadness. Even the wine refuses to comfort. You sip once, then pour the rest out the window, watching it splash on the stone like old blood. That night, you dream of knocking at the door. You open it and no one is there, only black robes and a mask with a beak, glistening like a bird of ill omen. You wake with a start. Your candle's gone out. The cold is back. You pull the covers tighter and wait for morning. More news arrives. The plague has taken a child. Then a stable hand. Then one of the kitchen maids. The last one had plucked rosemary just the day before. Now her herbs are on the fire and her name is not spoken. Fringe beliefs abound. Some say the air is cursed. Others blame a comet. One servant swears the chickens laid bloody eggs. No one challenges him. Superstition is safer than silence. You issue orders to confine everyone to quarters. Meals are delivered outside doors. No one touches. No one lingers. The great hall is silent, the chapel always full. And yet, through it all, you remain. Breathing. Waiting. Watching. They say the plague doesn't care for titles. It will take a duchess before it takes a dog. But maybe, just maybe, you'll be lucky. You hear of noble families who fled to the forests, building isolated camps with musicians and wine and pages in bright colors. You hear most of them still died. You stay. You sleep. You pray. And each time you wake, you count your breath and thank your lungs for staying loyal one more day. The air is clearer today. That's what the steward says, though he says it while standing a full 3 paces away and avoiding eye contact. You nod in return, the stiff formality of survival having replaced any semblance of normal conversation. It's been 3 weeks since the manor was sealed. The village below has fallen silent. That silence is louder than bells. But now there's another sound, hooves. Fast, urgent, a cloud of dust riding in with them. A royal messenger. You watch from the high window as he's stopped at the gate and questioned. He holds out a sealed parchment. The guard squints at it like it might bite. Eventually, the letter reaches your chamber. It smells of wax and horse sweat. You break the seal and scan it. The king is raising a new tax. Not a request. Not a plea. A demand. And nobles, especially wealthy landowners like you, are expected to contribute proportionally. You almost laugh. Almost. Because of course, even during plague, even during mourning, someone still wants your money. You summon your steward. He brings the account scrolls, leather-bound, heavy, filled with numbers that don't seem to mean anything until they suddenly mean everything. Your lands have lost workers. Your mills have gone silent. Your best weaver died last Thursday. But the crown doesn't care. The crown has debts. And war. Always war. Historians still argue whether these taxes were truly necessary or just convenient. But nobles knew the truth. When the king wants coin, he doesn't ask, he remembers. He remembers who hesitated. Who complained. Who mysteriously couldn't find the gold under their stone floors. You list assets aloud, livestock, stored grain, jewelry that can be melted. The steward flinches at the last one. Not the emerald brooch, he murmurs. You ignore him. But the money alone isn't enough. They want men, too. fighters, archers, guards. And every man you send is one less to till your soil, bake your bread, or clean your robes without coughing. You begin making lists. The steward adds small marks beside names. You pretend not to notice the initials LM, your old stablemaster, now missing 2 fingers but still able to walk. You hate this. Not because of the gold, but because it reminds you how thin your power truly is. You are rich, but the king is richer. And when he wants your land, your labor, or your best saddle horse, you smile and send it. There was a noble last winter who refused. Said no, too loudly. Claimed his taxes were unfair, his soldiers too few. He was summoned to court. He never returned. His estate was gifted to a cousin who had an unsettling grin and a gift for flattery. Fringe tales say some nobles paid in secrets. A list of names, whispered alliances, or who had been seen with whom in the garden after dark. Cheaper than coin, but far more dangerous. You return to the parchment and begin your reply. Your handwriting is careful, humble, but not obsequious. You mention the plague. You mention the losses. You offer a portion. Enough to sting, not enough to bleed. You sign it with your full title, 4 words long, 2 of which you always forget the proper Latin for. Then you seal it, press the wax, and hand it off to a courier who wipes his hands twice before touching it. Later, you pace. You consider raising rents. You consider selling land. You consider marrying off your niece to a merchant with a suspiciously full purse. Every option is sour. Every answer leads to another locked door. And all the while, you remain noble, dignified, gracious, which means silent, restrained, and very, very tired. You stare into the hearth. There's no fire, wood's being rationed, but you stare anyway. Imagining flames. Imagining warmth. Imagining a world where wealth meant freedom instead of obligation wrapped in embroidery. The king wants more. He always will. And you, as always, will give it. The morning starts with shouting, high-pitched, urgent, and unmistakably young. You groan before you open your eyes, already knowing what's waiting, your children. Or if not yours, the nieces, nephews, wards, and inconveniently legitimate second cousins who orbit your manor like anxious moons. You rise, dress in less than your best, and trudge to the nursery hall. There, chaos reigns. A nursemaid is trying to separate 2 boys arguing over a wooden sword. One girl is crying because someone stepped on her embroidery hoop. Another child, yours, you think, is trying to feed a dead beetle to the cat. Being a noble parent isn't about affection. It's about logistics. These children aren't just family, they're assets. Pawns in the long game of marriage, alliance, and inheritance. You look at your eldest, a boy of 8 with a jaw already too proud for his own good, and wonder which duke's daughter he'll be pledged to before his next birthday. Historians still debate the emotional role of noble parents. Some argue affection was real but formal. Others say children were raised at arm's length, loved, but through the medium of tutors, nurses, and governesses who did the actual rearing. You certainly didn't raise your children directly. That's what the wet nurse was for. And the language tutor. And the fencing master. And the friar who insists Latin is the only tongue worth forming correctly. Your daughter curtsies when she sees you, but forgets which hand goes where. She'll need more lessons. You smile anyway. She reminds you of your sister, clever, and destined to marry poorly. Unless you intervene. You take your breakfast with the children today, an unusual gesture that startles everyone, especially the cook. The bread is fresh, the milk warm, the honeycomb thick and slow to pour. One boy starts a story about a ghost in the hallway. You listen. Not because you believe, but because it's the first honest fear you've heard all week. You remember your own childhood, briefly. A room colder than this, stricter than this. A tutor who hit with a stick and smelled of radish and regret. A mother who cried when she thought no one saw. A father who only smiled when you recited land measurements correctly. You were educated for control. Grammar, etiquette, accounts, military strategy. Emotions were optional. Your children, though, well, they still laugh too easily. That's something. You visit the eldest's lessons later. He's reciting poetry about saints. The friar corrects him, gently but with the kind of gentleness that leaves bruises in the mind. You interrupt and ask the boy what he really thinks about the saint. He hesitates, then shrugs and says, "I think he was cold and didn't like boats." You nearly laugh. The friar doesn't. After lessons, the children are sent to the garden, such as it is. Overgrown hedges, a dried-up fountain, mud posing as lawn. But they run and shout and climb anyway, and for a moment you see them not as chess pieces, but as creatures with futures you can't entirely predict. One climbs the wall and waves at a passing merchant's cart. You shout for them to come down, not because it's unsafe, but because appearances must be preserved. Nobles don't wave at carts. Nobles nod. Slightly. If at all. Fringe thinkers at court whisper about a new idea, childhood as a separate stage of life. Not just small adults, but beings in progress. Dangerous talk. Revolutionary, even. You're not convinced. But when your youngest asks if birds believe in saints, you wonder what else they'll grow up to question. You write a letter to a nearby estate, inquiring about a potential match for your niece. She's 12 now. Practically a woman. The boy is 10 but from a wealthier family. You suggest they meet at the next feast and pretend to care about dogs. That night, you tuck your youngest into bed yourself. Again, not normal. Not expected. But the servant who usually does it is sick, and the child has learned your name properly at last. You sit beside them, listen to a muddled prayer, and adjust the blanket one extra time. They fall asleep quickly, trusting you to keep the darkness out. You don't tell them the truth, that the darkness lives inside the castle, that even the rich can't protect their children from what's coming. You just smooth their hair, rise quietly, and close the door behind you. The manor feels quieter these days. Not peaceful, just quiet, like the pause in a storm when everyone's waiting to see what will break next. You walk the upper corridors, past rooms no longer used, their doors shut against time and dust. You pass a chamber that once held feasts. Now it holds cobwebs and an overturned stool. You've been here too long. You feel it in the ache of your knees, in the way your thoughts echo in the stillness. Nobility, once a world of activity and whispers and guests, has narrowed to a kind of elegant isolation. You could throw a feast tomorrow and no one would come. Or worse, everyone would, and you'd have to smile through it. You make your way to the tower, where your private solar overlooks the valley. It's one of the only places where the sun dares to visit. The floor creaks beneath your boots, worn down by your pacing. You're waiting. You look out over your land. It's vast. It's yours. It's also terrifyingly empty. Historians still debate how lonely the upper class truly was. Some argue nobles were surrounded constantly, servants, petitioners, children, rivals, but none of those were equals. And without equals, there's no company. Just performance. You had friends once. Maybe. Courtiers. Hunting companions. A scribe who laughed too loudly. They've all drifted. Some to war. Some to plague. Some to alliances that now require a certain distance. And the ones who remain, their eyes flicker too much during conversation, as if weighing every word like coin. You write letters sometimes. Beautiful ones. Long ones. They go unanswered more often than not. Once, you received a reply 4 months late. It was from a cousin informing you of her death. You kept it anyway. The ink was pretty. You eat your meals in silence. Not because there's no one to join you, but because it's easier. Conversation has become a performance. Each word weighed, each smile measured. Even laughter feels choreographed. You once enjoyed music. Now even the minstrel's lute songs feel like reminders of dances no longer held, of voices you miss, of joy that has a closing time. Your steward reports the same things every day. The grain stores are stable, the wine casks untouched, the peasants quiet. It all sounds reassuring. But it only proves what you already know. Nothing is happening. Nothing is changing. And no one wants to say it aloud. Fringe tales speak of nobles who vanished into their own towers, convinced the world had turned against them. One supposedly had a chessboard with pieces carved to look like old friends. He played both sides. He always lost. You go walking in the lower halls and pass the portraits, ancestors in faded gold leaf, staring down with expressions you once thought were regal. Now they just look tired, as if they too waited too long for someone to talk to. You speak aloud, once, just to see what it sounds like. Your voice startles even you. It's rougher, slower. You say your own name. It sounds like someone else's. One afternoon, you find yourself sitting in the window seat of the West Wing, eating an apple and staring at the road below. A merchant cart rolls by, and the driver doesn't even glance up. No bow. No salute. just passes like you're a ruin. You don't blame him. Even your hound seems to understand. He follows you quietly now, less eager for scraps and more content to sit beside you like a shadow. His muzzle has grayed. His tail doesn't wag as much. You speak to him sometimes. He listens better than most courtiers ever did. You hear a knock one evening, sharp, deliberate. A traveler seeking shelter. You consider it. Then you lie. Say you're away. Say you're ill. Say nothing. The door remains closed. Because if they enter, you'll have to speak. And you're not sure how anymore. You wake to a sound you haven't heard in weeks, laughter. Not polite, courtly laughter, but something unguarded, cracked wide open by joy. It's faint, distant, drifting in through the narrow windows from the courtyard below. You rise slowly, unsure if you've imagined it, unsure if something inside you has finally snapped. Downstairs, you discover the source, a group of servants huddled near the well, sharing bread, passing a jug of rough wine. One of them tries to sing. He's awful. The others howl with mirth anyway. It feels impossible. In your courtyard, amid your silence, you watch from the archway, half shadowed by the great stone frame. No one notices you. Or maybe they do, and pretend not to. Either way, for once, you are not the center of the world. It stings a little, but only a little. You turn away and walk the perimeter of the courtyard. The stones are uneven, the moss thick in the corners, the drain clogged again. It's all yours. You inherited it, managed it, paid for it in sleepless nights and ledgers stained with anxiety. And yet, for all the gold in your vaults, all the titles after your name, you're outside this circle of warmth. Historians still debate the emotional cost of nobility. Some say isolation was the price of privilege. Others insist the elite created their own walls, stone outside, pride within. You stop by the stables and greet the stablemaster. He bows but avoids your eyes. He's lost 2 brothers to the plague. You offered coin, but not words. You wanted to, but didn't. What would you have said? I'm sorry feels insufficient. I understand would be a lie. A memory comes, a midsummer feast long ago, before the wars, before the cold truly set in. You danced with someone, who, exactly, you can't recall. But they laughed, spilled wine on your tunic, teased your terrible singing. For one night, you weren't lord or lady. Just you. You never danced again. You return to your solar and stare into the mirror. The lead paste has begun to crack along your temples. The lines beneath your eyes are not from age, they're from effort. Constant, invisible effort to maintain what no longer matters. A letter arrives. From court. The king is dead. Your breath catches. You sit, the parchment slipping from your fingers. His son ascends. A boy you met once, awkward, with a voice like cracked slate. The kingdom shifts, just slightly, like a table being leveled by a coin underneath. With the change in crown comes new uncertainty. New taxes. New alliances. Old enemies stirring beneath coats of arms and inherited grudges. You can feel it already, the ripple before the tide. You light a candle, even though it's still daylight. The room feels dim. Heavy. You think of your children, their faces thinner lately, their questions more complicated. Why don't you ever smile? One had asked. You didn't know how to answer. You glance at the tapestry in the corner, one you've always ignored. It depicts a stag, pierced by arrows, surrounded by hounds. Noble, yes. Majestic. Dying. You wonder if it was a gift or a warning. You kneel by the hearth, not to warm your hands but just to feel something solid beneath you. The stones. The soot. The silence. You are rich. You are surrounded by land, linen, and loyalty paid for in silver. And yet, at this moment, you would give it all for one honest conversation. One touch without ceremony. 1 hour of being unseen but truly known. Even your hound is gone now. Slipped away during the night, curled in the hay, breath quieting into nothing. You buried him yourself. No fanfare. You rise. You wash your face. You walk back to the courtyard. And this time, you join the circle near the well. No one bows. You do not speak. But someone hands you a crust of bread. And for the first time in months, you chew it slowly, and it tastes like something real. The fire burns low tonight, casting long, trembling shadows that stretch like memories across the stone floor. You sit by the hearth, cloaked but still cold, with a goblet in hand and silence for company. There are no guests, no summons, No feast laid up beneath iron chandeliers. Just the quiet tick of a drafty manor winding down. You used to believe in the performance, truly. That the titles, the brocades, the obligations were the price of greatness. That the gold thread mattered. That the weight of your rings reflected the weight of your influence. But now, with your hands bare and your hair unpowdered, you aren't sure what it all amounted to. You wander to the window, staring out at your lands. They're beautiful in the way winter is beautiful, cold, still, and unconcerned with you. The village lights flicker faintly in the valley, a gentle reminder that life continues, even when you're not the center of it. You hear soft footsteps behind you. A servant girl, no more than 16, offers a bowl of warm broth. Her hands shake as she holds it out. You take it. You thank her. And that alone startles her more than anything you've said in months. She leaves quietly. You sit again, broth steaming in your hands, and think, what now? There are no wars on your doorstep. No letters to respond to. No new demands from the crown. Just the creak of wood, the occasional sigh of wind, and your own thoughts turning over slowly like the gears of a rusted clock. Historians still argue what legacy means for the nobility. Some claim it's land. Others say bloodlines. But perhaps the truth is smaller than that. Perhaps it's how you're remembered in the kitchens. In the halls. Whether your name is whispered with fear or with something softer. You run your fingers across the scarred tabletop. This oak has outlived everyone you've ever danced with. It holds your secrets better than any confidant ever did. There's comfort in that. Quiet, undemanding comfort. You rise. You take the candle. You walk the halls one last time, slowly, deliberately. The tapestries nod in the breeze. The suits of armor still stand watch. A moth flutters near the light. You reach your chamber. The bed is already turned down. You ease into it, letting the straw mattress sigh beneath your weight. You close the curtains, not for privacy, but for warmth. Outside, the manor breathes its ancient, weary breath. The stones settle. The night deepens. And finally, you sleep. The cold softens now, fading into the corners of the room as the fire curls inward. Your breath slows. The weight of velvet, the clang of gold, the echo of empty halls, all of it slips away like mist at dawn. You are no longer lord or lady, heir or host. You are simply here. Quiet. At rest. The stone walls that once pressed in with their chill now cradle you gently, a cocoon of long memory and longer silence. Outside, the wind hums against the shutters, not in warning, but as lullaby. The flickering candle by your bedside gutters, casting one last amber wave across the pillow. And in this final stillness, you begin to feel something different, not pride, not burden, but release. You've carried titles, decisions, and lineage like armor for so long, you almost forgot what it felt like to be light. Let it go now. Let the velvet fade. Let the names sleep. In the end, no feast matters. No gem sparkles forever. But the small kindnesses, the bread shared, the hands steadied, the laughter once risked, those remain. Those drift gently on the air, echoing through the manor like a prayer too quiet for the altar. So close your eyes now. Let your breath join the rhythm of the stones. No one needs anything from you tonight. You've given enough. You've been enough. Sleep well, dear noble. Sleep deep. Sleep long. Sweet dreams.